File: confidential subject. Shadow trail date: compiled 2008 to 2017. Declassified excerpt: he walked the ridge, then the ridge walked back. Those 6 words are the last intelligible phrase recorded on radio log 709 before static swallowed the channel. Static that arrives like a curtain. Static that has become a punctuation in this file. For 9 years, a narrow spine of cedar and shale known locally as the Shadow Trail accumulated a tally local Serchandrescu units refused to pronounce aloud. 12 hikers unaccounted for. This document is an archival reconstruction. Portions remain redacted for ongoing leads and are marked redacted. Audio clips have been normalized. Timestamps cross-checked against synchronized watch logs. Photographs and physical evidence are cataloged with provenance where available labels, noting origin, custodian, and chain of custody. The language here is clinical by design. The content is not. The Shadow Trail appears routine on a topographic sheet, a tight contour line, a trail switchback, an innocuous ridge. On the ground, it behaves like a hunting ground. Witness accounts, instrument anomalies, and physical traces converge in patterns that exceed random misadventure. Items recovered show absence of expected predation marks. Devices fail at the moments that matter. Sound signatures register below human hearing, but not below consequence. Heat maps show upright profiles that do not match known fauna. Taken together, these data points create a statistical cluster. Taken together, they create a story that resists tidy explanation. Tag: Shadow Trail. Location grid: 49.12 N, 121.78 W. Oaks elevation range: 1,200 to 1,800 meters. Environment: dense conifer, steep escarpments, seasonal fog. Report sensitivity: Pi. Proceed with the understanding that the term missing in this file implies an absence inconsistent with known patterns of survival and demise for this region. We have preserved original audio where possible. Where audio could not be retained, transcripts are verbatim and flagged. Photographs are labeled with date, photographer, and chain of custody. Any gaps in that chain are recorded as exceptions. Biological samples were submitted to independent labs. Results and caveats are attached in later sections. Equipment logs include abrupt GPS jumps, unexplained battery drains, and camera sensor blackouts, each entry annotated and time-sensed across multiple devices when available. The file is real. The paperwork is thin, but the pattern is thick. Families filed missing person reports. SAR teams logged searches into the night. Local guides changed routes. Tourism operators quietly rerouted groups. Official memos advised caution. Public statements were measured and sparse. Internally, investigators used words like anomalous and cluster outside the file. The word repeated in whispers was different, edged with fear. This excerpt opens the case rather than closes it. It frames what follows: an operational chronology. Witness testimony vetted against employment records and independent interviews. Physical evidence cataloged with photographic scales and laboratory metadata, and an investigative synthesis that resists simple dismissal. Some pages are redacted. Some recordings carry gaps. Some questions will remain. Read this file as you would any field report, critically, methodically, with attention to provenance and bias, but also read it with the sound turned up. Listen for the low-frequency thumps on the recordings. Feel the silences that are recorded like events. Remember the static. The file is real. The chain of custody is real. The Shadow Trail remains active in this archive. We proceed not for spectacle, but to understand what watches from the tree line. The Shadow Trail is a ridge road that looks ordinary on a map and behaves anything but. It threads a narrow spine of cedar and shale between lower alpine bowls and mid-montane pockets, a scar left by ancient ice. From above, the line looks neat, a thin black hair across green, but on the ground the route forces you into exposed ledges, wind-scoured gullies, and tight coulees stuffed with wind-fallen timber. Where the topo drops into those coulees, thermals funnel through like an invisible tide, and late summer mornings can hang in a persistent, low fog that reduces visibility to a few paces. Hikers learn, quickly, that a ridge with a view can also be a corridor that disorients. Satellite overlays and field reconstructions showed the trail hugging an old glacial cirque. Compact ridgelines separated by knife-edged saddles, narrow passes with sheer footlofts, and short sequences of berry-rich clearings that act as natural magnets. Water runs in the gullies. Seasonal streams and late salmon runs, and scattered caves and root-wedged alcoves break the tree line. These microzones concentrate wildlife and people in the same tight geography, and they create choke points, places where a single misstep or an unusual sound can split a group or trap someone in a blind pocket. Indigenous oral histories mapped onto the same landscape predate modern recreation. Local First Nations speak of travel corridors and seasonal camps, but they also mention shapes at the tree line and pathways that vanish into fog. Those testimonies are not mythic padding, they are place knowledge repeated across generations. The archivists cross-referenced those accounts with early survey notes and found consistent references to ridge watchers and warnings about the quiet that swallows you. That language matters. It frames the terrain as lived in, not empty. Modern pressure changed the dynamic. After a popular regional guidebook listed the Shadow Trail in the early 2000s, used road improvements made the trailhead accessible to day trippers and solo hikers. SAR logs record a sharp uptick in small parties and unprepared visitors beginning around 2006. With increased human traffic came more incidents and a changed baseline. What had been occasional knowledge became a statistical cluster. Ecologically, the pocket supports a full complement of large mammals, deer, black bear, cougar, and a dense rodent base that sustains them. Yet field evidence from search sites diverges in notable ways. Carcass and disturbance patterns expected under normal scavenger behavior are absent in specific microzones. Recovered gear and tissue often lack the expected tooth or beak marks. Scavenger sign is oddly sparse where you would expect it to be heaviest. Where the archives across the 9-year window show no single extreme event to account for repeated, dispersed disappearances. Instead, the trail's natural architecture creates acoustic corridors that amplify low-frequency energy while masking higher frequencies, an environmental quirk that correlates with recorded anomalies later in the file. In short, the place itself can be a participant, and from the ridgeline perspective, routine maps may conceal conspiracies of wind, geology, and something else waiting at the edge of the fog. We centered the witness material on a narrow band of people whose credibility could not be easily dismissed. Guided 35 years guiding the same ranges with no history of hoaxes or attempt in seeking. Technician B, park technician, 18 seasons on the job, responsible for trail maintenance and long-term wildlife observations. SAR Commander C, former military, who logged every mission and kept meticulous after-action reports. Their identities were verified against employment rosters, personnel files, independent referrals, and recorded interviews. Chain of custody statements accompany many of their submissions. We treated their statements not as folklore, but as field evidence. What emerges from their accounts is a repeated sequence of small anomalies that together form a pattern. Parties set out on routine hikes, day trips, short backpacking circuits, a botanical survey. Communications are normal, radio or text check-ins, photos time-stamped and geotagged. Then something shifts. Witnesses describe an initial sensation, a prickle at the base of the skull, a drop in air pressure, the sudden stillness of birds. People report hearing low, distant thumps, heavy, irregular, below the range of normal animal calls, or an obvious silence that feels tactile. It was like someone pressed pause on the world, one survivor says. The birds stopped, the wind stopped, even the creaks sounded held back. The phrase repeats in filed notes, the world pauses, the file is real. Physical signs accompany the sensations, lines of broken saplings, bent into arcs, berry patches stripped clean in concentric patterns, packs found abandoned at the trail edge with straps clipped cleanly. Several survivors mentioned a compulsion they could not explain, an urge to walk off the established route toward a seemingly innocuous feature, a patch of berries, a collapsed root cellar, a dark opening between stumps. In at least 3 incidents, that compulsion precipitated a separation. In 2 others, a group member simply stopped speaking, turned, and walked away as if guided. Instrument failures are repeatedly reported and stamped into the timeline. GPS units briefly flip to erratic coordinates, compasses swing and refuse to settle. Digital cameras record displaced frames, photos where the subject shifts between exposures without movement. These malfunctions are not dismissed as user error in the reports, they are time-stamped, corroborated by multiple devices carried by different parties, and often coincide with the most pronounced subjective experiences. I watched my compass spin like a top, Guide A told an interviewer. It wasn't interference, it was wrong. For minutes, a SAR leader noted abnormal battery drain on radios and headlamps following a silence event. Chain of custody documentation shows these devices were handled continuously and examined promptly. Laboratory checks found no simple electronic tampering. Survivors' descriptions converge on sensory detail that resists easy classification. Shadows that move with intent, a breath-heavy silence, a scraping like a hand drawn along bark. Footprints appear in multiple reports, starts and stops, impressions that begin suddenly in soft soil and end without exit marks, as if a foot were lifted cleanly. Witnesses sometimes attribute personhood to the phenomenon. It didn't move like an animal, one climber said. It watched and decided. That consistency across independent testimonies increases evidentiary weight even while it raises questions about memory contamination and psychological stress. We flagged those risks and cross-checked with medical debriefs. While trauma colors recall the overlap of independent sensory reports, physical traces, and instrument anomalies, it is statistically significant. The human stakes thread through every entry. Families lost breadwinners. Guides feared ruined reputations. SAR volunteers risked life and limb searching. Narrow gullies. Economically, local businesses reported a downturn beginning mid-2013. As word spread, tourism fell, and a cottage industry of litigation began. One bereaved family threatened a civil suit that forced partial, internal disclosure. On a community level, the cumulative effect is corrosive. Insomnia runs through names in the files. Hypervigilance at tree lines. Hesitant hikers refusing old routes. Survivors describe an afterlife of minor fears that accumulate the sudden avoidance of ridgetop viewings. The inability to sleep with windows open. Behavioral echoes of an encounter that did not end but continued to shape lives. There is a moral weight to these testimonies. Credibility checks reduce some noise, but they cannot eliminate the human cost. People's livelihoods, reputations, and sanity are part of the ledger. They are recorded here because they matter. The witnesses are not theatrical witnesses to a mystery. They are people whose lives were altered on that ridge. The file is real. The file is real. September 14, 2011 is the day the file circles back on itself, a morning that, in the records, acts like a crystalline example of everything the Shadow Trail dossier has been trying to describe. The party, 3 hikers, 2 with decades of mountain experience, 1 recreational day hike. They set out before dawn, moving a narrow line along the ridge where wind-creased cedars clutch at shale. Their logs are meticulous, 612 radio check with bass, voices steady, 618 and 1 member's personal recorder, a low rhythmic thumping registers between 20 and 30 hertz, a pulse too deep to be a bird or a bear. 624 fog drops in like a curtain, visibility reduced to a few meters. The sequence that follows is textbook in its escalation. For the first moments, curiosity, low volume talk, a decision to duck, off-trail toward a berry patch. Movement slows. The party's gait changes as if they have all been asked to breathe quieter. Then, at 6:32, a radio transmission fragments into panic. It's not an animal. It's not. And the words are swallowed by something the engineers later catalog as a sudden, acoustic collapse. Across 3 independent devices, a Bazi Haju, a handheld recorder, and a GPS logger with an auxiliary microphone, the same phenomenon appears, a near-total cessation of ambient sound lasting between 18 and 42 seconds. The file labels it Silence Event 1109. Describing that silence risks flattening it into a metaphor. The witnesses describe it, otherwise tactile, dense, like the world holding its breath. Birds stopped mid-song. The murmur of wind through the coulee fell away. Water in a small trickle nearby seemed to continue without sound. On the waveform, the silence is a clean valley. On spectrograms, it is a drop in everything above the noise floor. On human bodies, it registered as physical. Motion slowed, pupils dilated, muscles tightened. People, in the quiet, reported feeling watched by an intelligence rather than a predator. At the margins of the silence, there are subtle, dreadful sounds. The recorder captures an elongated exhale, not an animal pant, but a diaphragmatic inhalation, long and deliberate. 2 clicks follow, irregular and soft. Later, analysts compared their acoustic signature to Bonan wood contact, or perhaps a deliberate communication by a hand against bark. When the silence ends, it does so not with a roar, but with a scraping, something dragged along tree trunks, moving in a slow arc. The arc is significant. It mirrors the pattern of disturbed saplings the search teams later documented, bent in a wide bow as if something large had leaned or pressed through a fringe of growth. The critical point is not violence but decision. On the recording, one hiker steps into a small clearing and radios, voice shaking, "Something's blocking the way." It is a statement of fact and disbelief. The group hesitates, then disperses, not in a chaotic stampede, but as if magnetized apart. 2 minutes later, 2 members of the party are found beyond the ridge, disoriented, one missing a pack. The third is gone. The ground where the missing person disappeared shows a rough semicircle of bent saplings descending into a gully. Footprints begin in soft soil without approach marks and stop abruptly where the slope steepened, as if the final steps were lifted cleanly from the earth. Technology tells part of the story and fails at other key moments. GPS tracks contain abrupt coordinate jumps during the silence. Compasses recorded by multiple parties swung erratically and then steadied. A body cam recovered from one of the found hikers contains a 42-second block of black frames while audio continues, not a file corruption. The lab reports conclude, but a sensor blackout. Batteries in 2 devices drained faster than ambient conditions should allow. These interruptions are not incidental. They coincide with the acoustic valley and the witness reports of an absence so complete recruits use the word nothing to describe it. Nothing, and yet the not nothing of exhalation and clicks, and the slow, deliberate scraping. The human dimension amplifies the technical puzzle. The 2 survivors who returned speak of a compulsion as much as fear, a tug at their limbs, a narrowing of attention that directed them away from their companion. One describes the sensation as a pressure at the nape, like a hand that could not be seen. Another later said simply, "It watched us decide what to do." Their credibility was vetted. No criminal records, no history of substance misuse, consistent debriefs with SAR medics. Yet their memories arrive braided with terror, fragmented time codes, details in different orders, the kind of recall that survives trauma. The overlap between their stories and the physical and electronic traces is too dense to be dismissed as shared fantasy. For investigators, the encounter crystallizes the worst scientific dilemma when instruments and testimonies both point to a phenomenon that defies neat classification. The silence functions strategically. It removes corroborating data at the crucial moment. It isolates individuals physiologically, and it creates a behavioral window in which a presence can manipulate choices without visible violence. That manipulation is the crucial inference. This is not mere predation. It appears deliberate, even surgical. The creature, if that is a correct term, exerts control through environmental modulation, weaponizing absence as effectively as a predator might use teeth. The aftermath deepens the stakes. The missing hiker's family, already fighting grief, demanded answers that the file could not fully provide. Local businesses felt the economic tremors. Guides who had brought parties through that ridge found their reputations undercut. SAR volunteers who crawled through the gullies later reported sleeplessness and a reluctance to be alone near tree lines. In the official logs, the language is clinical. In interviews, it is personal. The Shadow Trail, for those who survived it and those who searched it, is a place that insists on remembering you long after you leave. The encounter on September 14th remains the file's pivot, a moment where sound, silence, and human judgment converged, and where measurement failed exactly when it was needed most. It forces the investigator's hand toward an uncomfortable inference that something on the ridge can shape the environment to isolate and manipulate human parties. We call it an encounter because it involves people and a non-human agency. We call it critical because the silence rewrites the rules of observation. The file is real. The silence is not empty. The material logged under Shadow Trail moves from anecdote into the forensic because it must. What began as witness statements ends in molds, spectrograms, and lab spreadsheets. The evidence catalog is not a curiosity. It is a map of converging anomalies. Footprints, hair, audio, thermal traces, and equipment failures all align across time and site. Where possible, every item was entered into a formal chain of custody. Photographs are stamped with origin and examiner. Casts were made under witness supervision and stored in secured evidence lockers. Chain of custody, repeated and audited. Chain of custody. Those administrative rituals matter here because the case depends on small, reproducible details. Footprints are the most tangible trace. Multiple casts from sites 3, 7, and 11 show impressions 14 to 18 inches long, elongated with a pronounced mid-arch and widely splayed digits. Pressure ridges indicate a pronounced heel strike and then a rolling, weight-shifting gait, biomechanics inconsistent with known ungulates or human gait under load. The impressions frequently begin and stop at odd angles, sometimes appearing in single file, then dispersing into shallow scuffs that look intentional, as if weight was lifted rather than dragged. Scales and notes accompany every image. Independent orthopedists and gait analysts reviewed the casts and confirmed the anomalous pressure distribution. These are not fakes made in a weekend craft session. The detail is forensic grade. Biological samples complicate simple narratives. Hair fragments submitted blind to 3 separate labs returned inconclusive but provocative results. Coarse, dark filaments with a thick medulla showed patterns that did not match regional deer, bear, or known mustelids. Preliminary mitochondrial screenings yielded hits in broad primate clusters before quality control flags triggered secondary testing. Labs reported low template DNA, potential contamination vectors, and mixed profiles in some samples. That ambiguity is itself telling. Either the material resists clean classification, or it has been degraded or mixed by environment or experiment. Independent reviewers recommended nuclear DNA assays and stricter chain of custody controls before presenting definitive conclusions. Those steps were begun but not completed for all samples. The file acknowledges this incompleteness without apology. Evidence is what we have. Certainty is what we seek. Audio is the spine of several incidents. Low-frequency pulses between 18 and 28 Hz appear repeatedly in recordings from 3 separate teams. These pulses are below the usual range of avian and most mammalian calls and correspond to the moments witnesses place in their memory as the thumps or the heavy breathing. Spectrogram analysis shows harmonics and transient spikes that do not match engine noise, distant seismic events, or recorded animal calls in open databases. In one instance, the pulse preceded a silence event by 7 seconds. On another, an uptick in infrasound coincided with abrupt GPS coordinate jumps. Acoustic engineers consulted for the file noted that the topography of Shadow Trail narrow gullies and ridgelands creates natural waveguides that both amplify low frequencies and dampen higher ones, making infrasound a potent tool for disturbance without visible cause. Thermal imagery contributes another layer. 2 night tops captured upright thermal signatures moving beyond what would be expected of large quadrupeds. A vertical heat column with intermittent lower intensity near ground patches suggesting crouch or nesting behavior. The thermal profiles registered cooler than a human core but warmer than ambient rock and vegetation, with intermittent spikes corresponding to motion. Thermal analysts cautioned about emissivity variables. Wet fur, layered hair, or environmental moisture can skew readings, but the profiles, when cross-referenced with audio and footprint locations, create a pattern that resists easy dismissal. Most unsettling are the equipment anomalies. GPS tracks from 5 separate hikes show abrupt coordinate jump stylometry artifacts that do not reconcile with satellite logs or expected multipath errors, often synchronized to silence events. Batteries drained unusually quickly in otherwise temperate conditions. 2 body cams recorded continuous audio while video frames went black for 18 to 42 seconds. Forensic imaging teams determined the gaps were not post-file corruption, but a sensor-level blackout. 1 field camera housed inside a locked Pelican case and monitored by a single operator recorded itself powering down for 42 seconds. The operator swore the case was sealed and untouched. Forensic logs of remote case access confirm no authorized interaction. The annotation in the file reads, "Unexplained interruption, not a glitch, not operator error, an interruption." Those interruptions are not mere annoyances. They puncture the chain of observation at the moment where inference would otherwise become proof. The silence does not only remove data, it changes behavior. Witnesses report physiological effects during silence events: constricted time perception, target fixation, rapid spatial disorientation. SAR teams describe search corridors where compasses swung, magnetometers registered transient anomalies, and radios lost locks despite line-of-sight conditions. Where machines failed, human certainty frayed. Credibility is a fragile asset in this case. Guides risked careers by testifying. Labs risked reputation by publishing tentative results. And families demanded answers that the instruments refused to give. Technical analysis leaves us with convergent uncertainties, rather than a single smoking gun. Footprints point to bipedal weight transfer. Hair hints at a primate-like origin but lacks unambiguous DNA confirmation. AUDIO reveals organized low-frequency emissions timed with behavioral effects. Thermal data suggests upright movement not explained by known fauna. Equipment failures cluster temporally with silence events and an unexplained interruption. Each dataset alone could be dismissed as contamination, misinterpretation, or coincidence. Together, they demand an explanation that fits all the parts. And so, we reach the investigators' practical horror. The instruments our allies have limits that can be exploited. The interruptions are not ancillary, they are part of the phenomenon. That possibility forces the archive into a procedural paradox: to document without provoking, to gather without becoming the lure. The file is real, the gaps are real. What fills those gaps remains the central, unnerving question. Cross-referencing the shadow trail entries against the archive's broader database transforms isolated anomalies into a pattern with geography, timing, and behavior. At first glance, the case is read like separate tragedies. A lone hiker vanishes in 1999 on a neighboring ridge, a party scatters beneath fog in 2004, and 2 members never return. A night watch team in 2015 finds concentric depressions in torn fabric beside a creek. But when those incidents are plotted, a corridor emerges, a 62-kilometer arc of correlated events that aligns with riparian cuts, ridge Tugly transitions, and the acoustic corridors highlighted in our topographic analysis. The map does not lie. The pattern insists. Temporal clustering is the first tabulation that raised eyebrows. Late summer and early fall recur across decades. Warm days, cool nights, berry season, salmon runs. These are times when human activity in the backcountry spikes, and they are also the windows in which multiple files trace the same low-frequency signatures. Organized pulses between roughly 18 and 28 Hz registered on independent devices, often immediately preceding a silence event. The frequency band is consistent. The timing is not random, and the behavioral outcomes compass failure. GPS jumps, abrupt disorientation recur with an unnerving regularity. The phenomenon appears to favor specific microzones, narrow passes where ridge funnels sound into gullies, berry thickets that draw parties off trail, streamside clearings that offer both food and exposure. Artifact parallels deepen the correlation. Footprints measured at 3 separate sites across a 40-kilometer span share morphology, 14 to 18 inches in length, a pronounced mid-arch, splayed toe impressions, and a pressure pattern that indicates heel-first weight transfer with a lateral roll. Casts, taken by different teams under different supervisors, show the same asymmetry. The chain of custody for those casts is documented. Photographs bear metadata. Lab notes cross-verify scales and calipers. The file is real. The prints persist. Material anomalies repeat as well. At Site 3, investigators found fragments of woven fabric containing mineral particulates not native to the immediate watershed, a silica-rich matrix more typical of a different bedrock outcrop 30 kilometers away. At Site 7, depressions arranged in near-concentric rings were filled with the same mineral striations and contained broken branches with marks that are neither teeth nor classic tool gouges. In multiple locations, biological samples returned ambiguous results. Coarse dark filaments, whose mitochondrial reads flirted with primate signatures before contamination flags, shifted analysis toward inconclusive. Labs reported procedural rigor. Chain of custody entries show sealed transfers, yet the genetic picture remained muddled. Taken together, the artifacts repeat a sequence: footprint, hair, infrasound, silence, interruption, then the trail goes cold. Behavioral parallels are perhaps the most disquieting. Across records, the subjects are rarely attacked in a predator's conventional sense. Instead, parties are separated, instruments fail, and selective individuals are removed or incapacitated, while others are left bewildered. In a 2004 case, for instance, 2 members of a 4-person team were found days later downstream, clothes intact, shoes missing, eyes dilated with chronic startle responses. In the 2011 Shadow Trail encounter, 1 member vanished amid a ring of bent saplings. Footprints trailing from the arc did not match human gait. Survivors from different years independently described the same 5 beats: distant heavy stepping, a focused feeling of being watched, compulsion to move toward a specific plant or clearing, a profound silence that feels tactile, then separation or loss. This is not the scattershot behavior of opportunistic scavengers. This is selective engagement. Repeated returns to microzones suggest either habitual routes or occupied ranges. Nest-like depressions cataloged in 1999 and again in 2015 show not only similar structure but recurring placement relative to water and forage. The same non-local mineral inclusions, the same pattern of broken saplings, the same partial clothing shards. This repetition supports two possibilities that are not mutually exclusive: a resident population with learned routes and preferred microzones, or a network of transient groups that share foraging strategies and cultural behaviors. In ethological terms, the evidence points to social learning, the passing of location knowledge, acoustic usage, and encounter strategies from one cohort to the next. Comparative cases from adjacent ranges supply behavioral congruence beyond this corridor. In 2004, a party on the eastern flank reported a rib cage-shaped depressional feature and an infrasound pulse, followed by equipment blackout, a camera that later showed a manual power down in its time code, but whose operator swore the device was never touched. In 1999, searchers documented concentric trampling around a carcass that bore marks inconsistent with known scavengers. The layout looked ritualized rather than utilitarian. Recurring features, non-local mineral traces, ambiguous tool marks, rhythmic low-frequency signals, deliberate silences thread these cases together into a behavioral signature. Taken as a whole, the cross-case comparisons shift the working hypothesis away from isolated predation or human malfeasance toward an animal-based phenomenon with social complexity. The signature is one of targeted manipulation, disabling or degrading human instruments, controlling group movement, and selectively engaging individuals. The corridor's scale implies a population larger than a pair or a temporary family group, and artifacts' commonalities raise the possibility of cultural transmission. Learned responses to humans replicated across years and kilometers. For the community living alongside these ranges, this is not an academic problem. Patterns here have economic and social effects. Guide services altered routes, tourism dipped, volunteer SAR teams exhausted local resources, and families pressed for answers they could not get. The archives map is a ledger of loss and altered lives. The file is real, the connections are real, yet the pattern's coherence is also its ethical weight. If behavior is learned and repeatable, disclosure risks teaching or enraging what watches from the tree line. If the pattern indicates a population with social memory, then each new incursion changes the calculus of risk. Cross-case comparison does more than suggest a common agent. It forces a practical question. How do we study what adapts to our presence without making it adapt faster? The answer is not contained in the data alone. It waits over the ridge, in the silence between our instruments and whatever listens back. Synthesis begins with the facts and ends with a word we do not like to use: intelligence. Not in the loose sense, as in clever scavenging, but as a patterned, repeatable set of behaviors that imply memory, strategy, and social transmission. The compiled evidence from Shadow Trail, the 14 to 18-inch prints with the mid-arch and splayed toes, the hair samples that point toward primate markers before labs raised contamination flags, the synchronized infrasound pulses between 18 to 28 Hz, the documented silence events, and the equipment failures that cluster at precise moments forms a hypothesis that is both uncomfortable and, at present, the most coherent explanation. A large, socially organized primate-like population is using the microtopography of the corridor as a controlled hunting and deterrence zone. This hypothesis rests on convergent lines of inquiry, and we are explicit about our standards. Footprint casts were made under chain of custody, catalog numbers recorded, spectrographic analyses were peer-reviewed by independent acoustic labs, mitochondrial screens were replicated when possible. None of these alone prove intent. Taken together, repeatedly, in space and time, they create behavioral patterns that are not readily explained by chance, weather, or single-species predation models. Consider the mechanisms implied by the data. Acoustic manipulation appears central. The trail's gullies and ridges create natural low-frequency channels. Devices and witnesses report infrasound pulses immediately preceding navigation failures and silence events. Low-frequency energy can travel for kilometers and influence mammalian vestibular systems, causing nausea, disorientation, and a compulsion to move off course. Whether emitted biologically or amplified by topography, the timing and repetition suggest purposeful use. Footprints and thermal records indicate upright locomotion and deliberate positioning, blocking passes, directing movement toward buried patches or gullies, then exploiting fog and acoustic corridors to separate groups. The selective nature of engagement: some people returned intact but psychologically altered. Others, removed entirely, implies discrimination, not random attack. Alternative explanations were tested and largely rejected. Known carnivore predation fails to match carcass and mark patterns. Human foul play lacks motive, coordination across terrain, and would likely leave predictable forensic signatures absent here. Instrument failure due to magnetic anomalies or battery faults cannot account for synchronized failures across device types and across independent teams, nor for the coincident biological traces. We remain methodical, not conspiratorial. The file is real, the chain of custody is documented, and anomalies persist within those constraints. If the central theory is correct, the implications are seismic. We are not confronting an animal that eats humans for caloric gain. We may be confronting an entity, or a set of entities, that understands human grouping behavior well enough to manipulate it. That understanding could be learned over generations. Repetition of tactics that worked, shared routes, and possibly tools or displays that function as deterrents or territorial markers. The archive has found concentric trampling and arranged depressions in multiple sites. These are not merely incidental, they read like repeated practice. Now the investigator admits what the data forces us toward, and this admission carries a moral weight. Naming a pattern is not neutral. To say aloud that a sentient, non-human actor may be defending space is to invite two outcomes: exposure or escalation. Public disclosure could protect hikers through awareness and mitigation strategies, or it could do the opposite, turn the shadow trail into a magnet for curiosity, for provocation, for hunters and documentarians whose presence would only accelerate defensive responses. The file records internal debates about the ethics of publication, how much to release, how to frame the narrative, who to involve, protecting families, protecting volunteers, protecting the subject. These aims are sometimes at odds. There is also a professional fear that is less administrative and more existential. If this is a creature with the capacity to learn and adapt in response to human behavior, then our very attempts to study it may teach it to counter us more effectively. Observation becomes instruction. Cameras, lights, and calls could be incorporated into its behavioral repertoire. The investigator's third layer of narration must admit reluctance. The more we know, the more we risk. Yet paralysis is also a risk. Doing nothing invites further disappearances and deepening trauma for communities already altered by loss and suspicion. The prudent reading demands controlled, minimally invasive observation redundancy in sensors, surgical anonymity in placement, and strict chain of custody for any material evidence. It demands that we treat the shadow trail less as a mystery to be conquered and more as an active boundary to be negotiated, so we state both hypothesis and fear plainly. Patterns indicate a social primate-like phenomenon with environmental manipulation capability. The organism, if organism is the right word, may be sentient, territorial, and capable of adapting tactics. The investigator fears the consequences of both silence and exposure. We close this section with a procedural note. The file will carry forward. Hypotheses will be tested, not shouted. Evidence will be preserved, not exploited. The file is real. The choices we make next will determine whether the shadow trail remains a corridor of the missing or becomes a ruin of our own making. Conclusion: after 9 years of compiled logs, witness statements, physical casts, and spectral analyses, the shadow trail cluster resists tidy closure. Patterns recur with a stubborn regularity. Late summer timing, ridge-tuggly transitions, synchronized low-frequency signatures, equipment anomalies that line up with documented silence events, and footprint morphology that repeats across independent sites. Taken together, these strands form a signal in the noise, not proof beyond all doubt, but probabilistically significant and operationally urgent. The most parsimonious synthesis in this file is uncomfortable but coherent. We are dealing with a large-bodied, socially organized organism that exploits specific microtopography and acoustic corridors to control human movement. The evidence points to intentionality, selective engagement, induced separation, the use of infrasound and silence as tools, and to an ability to learn from interactions. This is not a catalog of random misfortune. It is, as our field notes keep returning to, a pattern of behavior that admission forces hard choices. Publish everything and risk turning the shadow trail into a curiosity magnet, a target for hunters, thrill seekers, and well-meaning documentarians whose presence could provoke defensive escalation. Seal the file and risk more disappearances, compounded grief, and a continued hemorrhage of local trust. There are moral stakes, families seeking answers, volunteers who still trek the ridges, and the investigators whose credibility and safety hang in a balance. The file is real. The chain of custody must be preserved. The file is real. Operational recommendations are built on precautionary science and layered redundancy. We advocate a controlled, covert monitoring program during peak months, late July through October, focused on microzones with prior activity, ridge crests, coulee mouths, and water-adjacent clearings. Deployments should obey 3 imperatives: minimal invasiveness, sensor redundancy, and strict chain of custody. Sensor suite, synchronized thermal arrays, low-frequency hydrophones and infrasonic phones, multi-angle night vision with mechanical shutters, and dual GPS tracks with physical waypoint markers. Each device must have a physical backup, redundant batteries, independent recorders, and analog timestamps to prevent single-point failure. Placement protocol, camouflage, and surgical anonymity. No baiting, no loud calls, no camped observation posts within sensitive zones. Observers must be remote. Data must be retrieved under controlled conditions with documented chain of custody. Analytical protocol, blind third-party lab analysis for biological samples. Independent acoustic teams to vet infrasound signatures. Coordinated cross-referencing of GPS anomalies and device interruptions as primary signals, not noise. Human considerations are equal to technical ones. Establish a family liaison unit devoted to transparent, compassionate communication, not speculation. Offer counseling resources to survivors and search volunteers. Limit public exposure. Raw data releases should be embargoed to vetted researchers and credentialed institutions unless disclosure is specifically authorized by the family liaison and a multi-agency oversight board. For the archives audience, we will declassify additional material on a controlled schedule. The next release will include raw audio clips and annotated footprint casts from Site 7, available to subscribers and accredited researchers under a data use agreement. If you visited the Shadow Trail or nearby corridors between 2006 to 2017, your records matter. Submit exact dates, GPS tracks, photographs, and any audio or video through the archive portal. Preserve originals. Do not alter metadata. If you possess physical artifacts, contact the Family Liaison Unit before sending anything. Chain of custody is not a bureaucratic phrase here. It is the only way this evidence retains value. A final warning: do not go to the Shadow Trail. Curiosity has weight. Footsteps on that ridge change more than maps. Our obligation is to learn, to protect, and to act without turning the unknown into a spectacle. The choices we make now will determine whether this corridor remains a place of quiet loss or whether it becomes a locus of repeated harm. We proceed not for fame, not for a headline, but to keep people from disappearing into the sound of silence. The file is real. The file will be preserved. The work continues.